Something that could be said about Harry Wilson Watrous, who painted this work around 1933 when he was 76 years old, is that he was born at the wrong time. Had he only been born in Antwerp, say, in the early 17th century, instead of San Francisco in the mid-19th, he could have found his people, like maybe the still-life painter Clara Peters. This is from about 1617. It's in the collection at LACMA, but right now it's in the Getty. As it was, he was never cool. He was in his best period a painter of granular, nearly trompe-l'oeil still life in a style so out of step with the lapping waves of both modernism and the American realism tones of the 1930s that he is all but excised from the art historical record. Alone in his late pursuit of near-deceptive, hyper-real, starkly lit things, he found fellowship with other artists by way of administration. Earlier in the century, there's no trace of him near the 1913 Armory show that popped up in town and brought European modernism through the door, even though he was living and working in New York at the time, and there's a reason for that. The group that put it on was founded in opposition to, the New York Times even says revolt of, his very values and that of the Academy of Design that he was a long-standing officer in. He was on the other side. That was Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. This is Matisse's Red Studio, both shown at the Armory. Instead, Watrous turns up in the paper of record throwing a party for 200 at the Plaza 6 months later. His life is a good reminder of how many things and movements and worlds there are in New York all at once. How we really don't know what is going to be remembered. At this party, there are games, serpentine dances, winners of silver cups. Notable actresses are present. This is silent film star Ivy Troutman. This is Albert Herter, working solidly in the tradition of Sargent. Watrous doesn't have a proper one-man show until the end of his life. Most of his recorded presence is attending or hosting parties or chairing organizations. He even gathers a huge collection of other painters' palettes, which is now installed in the Salmagundi Club. I came upon it by accident once. He never has children who might later run a foundation or promote him. His wife Elizabeth, also a painter, precedes him in death. Here she is in a desk she made out of a sleigh and some carpets. When he dies, he's living with a cousin. He has 93 paintings in his studio when he dies, and they all get auctioned off 6 months later. He doesn't have a raisonné or a historian taking up the torch of his life and work. Here's an effort on Wikipedia. He's just not important enough. And yet, while most of his career is unremarkable, trained in the Académie Julian in Paris, almost all biographies and reviews call his work disparagingly academic. His early work is grand tourish, Meissonier-esque genre scenes and staid portraits. Then, around the turn of the century, he paints these idealized Gibson-style girls, smoking and talking to birds in interiors. Some of them become covers for Ladies' Home Journal, and that's about right, illustrations more like. They almost look like advertisements for something ineffable. I would say proto-feminism, but his wife, we know, was anti-suffrage. She actually worked against the vote for women. So maybe there is commentary here, because we do see these devotional portraits, too, as a kind of counterpoint. And it is in this period that he makes his most discussed and considered work. It's called The Drop Sinister. It's a portrait of an interracial family. The teacher, Kelly Bagdanov, has a good essay introduction about this on YouTube. It seems like he's going for politics in this period, but it's not very clear what they are. Still, many of these works are in museums, largely because they were donated, and his highest price at auction is for a work in this style. But I can see already in these sentimental, visually derivative post-Victorian works a special attention paid to the things on the table, the details. Even the figures attend to them. This woman talks to her figurines. This one mends a chip in her vessel. And so it makes sense that object studies are where he ends up finding, I would argue, a real voice, an ability to call forth the uncanny, a kind of numinous presence in the representation of, say, a Delft vase. I've lived with this one for a number of years, in different apartments through a pandemic, and felt the comfort of its quiet regularly. It is the first still life I've acquired, and it's taught me what it means to live with the genre, to consider the world minus its narratives, as Norman Bryson has written. Still life pitches itself at a level of material existence where nothing exceptional occurs. There is a wholesale eviction of the event. Watrous was, maybe rather unfortunately for art, independently wealthy. Here he is in the bottom row, in the middle. We may have known him better had he only had to work. Childless, he loved fishing, was popular, and either lacked drive to market himself, or perhaps felt that his later work had a higher calling. Often cited as venerable, he approved on the record of Nelson Rockefeller's destroying Diego Rivera's mural, Man at the Crossroads. He never had a dealer or gallery. He self-funded his only gallery show. The modernist painter Marsden Hartley reviewed it somewhat favorably. The only sales record, really, is this informal pencil scribble on the pamphlet for his estate sale. The highest-selling work was this one, Rose Madonna, for $785. It resold last year in upstate New York for $12,000 minus fees. Adjusted for inflation, that's about the same price. The second highest selling was the Delft vase for $415. 5 years before he died, he gave a painting to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's still there in the American wing and what's called visible storage, technically not on view in the galleries but able to be seen in a kind of categoric way. The works that surround it are much better known trompe-l'oeil or trick-of-the-eye paintings. In a nice twist, this work was included in a show of realism at MoMA in 1942. In the introduction, Lincoln Kirstein, an important figure especially to modern dance, writes of how precision had been a major feature in the character of American paintings from Copley onwards. He calls Watrous's work illusionistic. There's more than a few mentions of how he lost his eyesight to some extent for a long period around 1900, then gained it back 20 years later. He would have been 43 when he lost it. That's my age, and so I know from a recent ophthalmologist visit that it can be a period of onset loss of nearsightedness. Maybe he just didn't have good enough reading glasses for 20 years. Because that's what these look like to me. They look like paintings made by someone who just got new glasses, who takes nothing for granted, who can, for the first time, make out each leaf on the tree. There is a gratitude for the microscopic, though the works are actually quite large, probably to accommodate his failing eyesight. So the form and the content suggest a kind of worship, an enlarging of the small, the overlooked, the supposedly inanimate. And I'm reminded of the painter Candy Jernigan's works near the end of her life in 1991. For months she painted only vessels, and her partner Philip Glass writes in his memoir that on the last morning of her life, she woke up and could not paint one. We know that these are end-of-life works for Watrous. It seems to me that they're aware of it. They're kind of out of time. Frequently one notes an absence of it. No fruit, nothing perishable, the works don't obey the conventions of so many still lives and memento mori, which include a feast or a clock or a skull. And so, I reconsider the comparison I made to Clara Peters in the beginning of this talk, and I present what I think is a better historical partner. This is by the Spanish painter Zurbarán from 1650 in the Prado. It's 4 vessels: essential, quiet, focused, devoted. The real co-protagonists are formal: the shallow depth of field, the darkness, and the raking light. This painting is for sale right now on eBay. It's nice to find an artist who has a knowable biography, but whose work is not so feverishly collected. It means that much of it is still out there, waiting.